Most people don't realize they're stepping into a fight until the first punch lands. Me? I knew long before that. It was the night I found the sign. I'd gone out to the lake after sunset, the way I always did when the day felt too heavy. The water was calm, black as ink, reflecting the moon in a way that made the whole place look untouched, like the world hadn't yet figured out how to ruin it. That's when I saw it. A brand new wooden post hammered into the ground near the shoreline, and hanging from it, a freshly printed metal sign, Lakeside Community HOA, private amenity, members only, my lake, my land, their sign. For a long moment, I just stared at it, trying to decide whether to laugh or start swearing. The audacity was almost impressive. They hadn't even bothered to hide the wet dirt around the post. Whoever put it there had done it recently, maybe even while I was inside eating dinner. I pulled the sign off the post, tossed it onto the dock, and that's when I noticed I wasn't alone. A figure stood at the tree line, half hidden by shadows, arms crossed, watching me. Even without seeing her face, I knew who it was. Marjorie Penwell, HOA President, professional boundary pusher, the kind of woman who believed rules were suggestions for other people. She stepped forward just enough for the moonlight to catch her expression, a tight, satisfied smirk. "I see you found our sign," she said. "Your sign," I repeated. "On my property." She didn't flinch. "The community has always used this lake. It's part of our identity. You can't just change that." I held up the sign. "Watch me." Her smile thinned. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. And you're trespassing." For a moment, neither of us moved. The only sound was the soft lap of water against the dock. Then she tilted her head, studying me like I was a puzzle she intended to solve, or break. "You'll understand soon enough," she said. "Some properties end up in the right hands eventually, one way or another." She turned and disappeared into the trees, leaving the night colder than before. I looked down at the sign in my hand, the metal catching the moonlight like a blade. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a neighborly dispute. It wasn't even about the lake. It was a takeover. And the HOA had just fired the first shot. "Hi, my name is Andrew West. I inherited this property from my uncle when he passed away 6 months ago. It was an 86-acre property with a lake on it. I remember my grandfather and uncle would always be out fishing when my mother and I went to visit. And my uncle, not having children of his own, always said that the property would one day be mine. Now that it was, I wanted to honor my grandfather and uncle and run the place as a proper working farm. If only it were going to be that simple. Thanks for listening to my story, and if you like it, a like and subscribe would really help me get stories like this out to all of you. I arrived at the farm the next morning with the sign from the night before still sitting in the passenger seat of my truck. I hadn't meant to bring it, but I also couldn't bring myself to leave it behind. It felt like evidence, the first piece in a puzzle I hadn't asked for. The gravel driveway was just as I remembered it from childhood visits, long, uneven, and lined with stubborn weeds that refused to die no matter how many times my uncle hacked at them. The farmhouse stood at the end of it, weathered but proud, its white paint peeling like sunburned skin. It wasn't pretty, but it was honest. That counted for something. I stepped out of the truck and breathed in the familiar scent of pine, damp earth, and old wood. For a moment, I let myself believe that inheriting this place might actually be a blessing, a chance to start over, to build something of my own. Then I saw her. Standing at the gate, arms folded, posture rigid, was the same woman who'd watched me from the trees the night before. Only now she wasn't hiding, she was waiting. Marjorie Penwell, HOA royalty, self-appointed guardian of property values, and apparently my new shadow. She smiled when she saw me, but it wasn't the kind of smile that reached the eyes. It was the kind that said she'd already decided how this conversation would go. "Good morning," she called out, as if she hadn't trespassed on my land 12 hours earlier. "I thought I'd stop by and formally welcome you to the neighborhood." I walked toward her slowly, the sign still tucked under my arm. "You were on my property last night." Her expression didn't change. "I was checking on the lake. It's a community feature, you know." "It's not," I said. "It's mine." She tilted her head, studying me like I was a stubborn stain she couldn't scrub out. "You keep saying that. But the community has always used the lake. It's part of our identity." "Your identity is not my problem." Her smile tightened. "You'll find that cooperation goes a long way around here. And you'll find that trespassing doesn't." For the first time, a crack appeared in her composure. Not big, just a flicker of irritation, quickly smoothed over. "I understand this is all new to you," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "But the previous owner was accommodating." I almost laughed. My uncle? Accommodating? The man once chased a census worker off his porch with a rake. But then it hit me. He'd been sick. Weak. Not himself. And Marjorie had taken advantage of that. The realization settled in my stomach like a stone. She wasn't just pushy. She was opportunistic. Predatory. I lifted the sign and held it out to her. "Take this back." She didn't move. "Marjorie," I said, my voice low, "this is the last time I'm going to say it. This property is not part of your HOA. The lake is not part of your HOA. And you don't get to claim it just because you've been pretending it's yours." Her eyes hardened, the friendliness draining away like someone had flipped a switch. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly. "No," I replied. "I'm correcting one." She turned without another word and walked back toward the subdivision, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement like a metronome counting down to something I couldn't yet see. I watched her go, the morning sun rising behind her, casting a long shadow across my land. I had inherited a farm. I had inherited a lake. And apparently, I had inherited a war. I just didn't know how far the HOA was willing to go to win it. Not yet. The first violation notice showed up on my third morning at the farm. I found it taped to my mailbox with enough packing tape to survive a hurricane. The envelope was bright orange, the kind of color chosen specifically to embarrass someone. I didn't even have to open it to know who it was from. Lakeside Community HOA Notice of Violation. I opened it anyway. Violation number 1. Unauthorized livestock goats observed on property. Livestock must be approved by the HOA board. I stared at the paper, then at my 2 goats grazing peacefully near the barn, blissfully unaware that they were now criminals. I wasn't in the HOA. I wasn't under their jurisdiction, and yet here I was, apparently breaking rules I'd never agreed to. I crumpled the notice and tossed it into the truck bed. I figured it was a mistake. A petty one, sure, but still a mistake. Maybe Marjorie hadn't gotten the message yet. Maybe she thought persistence would wear me down. I was wrong. The second notice arrived that afternoon. Violation number 2. Unapproved fencing fence does not meet lakeside community aesthetic standards. The fence in question was older than the subdivision. My uncle had built it with his own hands, using whatever lumber he could salvage. It wasn't pretty, but it worked, and it certainly wasn't subject to HOA aesthetic standards. I added the second notice to the growing pile in the truck. By the time the third one arrived, hand-delivered, of course, I was starting to see the pattern. Violation number 3. Failure to maintain community shoreline. That one made me laugh. Out loud. Alone in the yard like a lunatic. Community shoreline. They really were committed to the bit. I walked down to the lake, half expecting to find Marjorie lurking in the bushes with a clipboard. The water was calm, the surface smooth except for the occasional ripple from a fish breaking through. Nothing about it looked like it needed community maintenance, but the notice wasn't about maintenance, it was about pressure. I went back to the house and found a 4th envelope stuck under the doormat. Violation 4. Suspicious activity reported individual seen carrying tools in a manner inconsistent with community safety guidelines. I read that one twice. I was fixing a loose hinge on the barn door. Apparently, that was now suspicious. I sat on the porch steps, the stack of notices in my lap, and let the reality settle in. This wasn't incompetence. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a campaign. A slow, steady, relentless attempt to bury me under so much frustration that I'd pack up and leave. Sell the property. Hand over the lake. Make their problem disappear. But they didn't know me. I wasn't the type to fold because someone taped a few orange envelopes to my mailbox. I wasn't the type to run because a woman with a clipboard didn't tea like my goats. If anything, the notices had the opposite effect. They made me stubborn, determined, ready. I gathered the papers, smoothed them out, and placed them neatly into a binder I'd bought earlier that day. A binder I hadn't planned on needing but now realized would become my best weapon. If the HOA wanted a fight, they were going to get one. And I wasn't planning on losing. By the end of the week, the violation notices weren't just an annoyance. They were a routine. Morning coffee, check the weather, peel an orange envelope off the mailbox. It was like living in a sitcom written by someone who hated me. But the notices were only the beginning. The real pressure campaign started quietly, almost politely, the way a storm starts with a single gust of wind. The first sign was the realtor. I was repairing a loose board on the porch when a shiny black SUV rolled up the driveway. A woman in heels stepped out, smiling like she'd just discovered a rare collectible. "Hello," she chirped. "I'm Dana with Lakeside Realty. I heard the property might be coming on the market soon." I stared at her. "Where did you hear that?" "Oh, the HOA President mentioned you were considering selling. She asked me to stop by and give you a valuation." I set down my hammer. "I'm not selling." Her smile flickered, but she recovered quickly. "Well, if you change your mind, I'd love to help. Properties with lake access are in very high demand." I didn't bother correcting her. She wasn't the problem. She was just another pawn on Marjorie's board. The second sign came 2 days later. I woke up to find a group of strangers walking along the lake's edge, pointing at the water and taking photos. At first, I thought they were tourists. Then I overheard one of them say, "The HOA brochure didn't do it justice." I walked down to them. "This is private property." A man with a camera frowned. "The HOA said this was a community lake." Well, the HOA lied. They apologized and left, but the damage was done. The subdivision had been sold a fantasy for years, and now I was the villain ruining it. The third sign was harder to ignore. I came home from town to find a bright yellow notice stuck to my front door. "Mandatory HOA meeting. Attendance required." I tore it down and tossed it into the trash, but the message was clear. They weren't just pretending I was part of the HOA. They were trying to force me into it. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my binder open, flipping through the stack of violations, letters, and notices. The binder was getting thick, too thick for something that should have been simple. I'd inherited a farm. I hadn't inherited a war. But the HOA was determined to make it one. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, listening to the old house creak around me. My uncle had lived here for decades without bending to anyone. He'd fought droughts, storms, and the occasional nosy neighbor. He'd built this place with his own hands, and now it was my turn to protect it. The next morning, I found Marjorie waiting at the gate again, clipboard in hand, smile sharpened to a point. "Good morning," she said. "I noticed you didn't attend the meeting." "I'm not in your HOA." She sighed dramatically, as if I were a child refusing to eat vegetables. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be. And you're making it exactly what it doesn't need to be." Her eyes narrowed. "You'll find that resistance only creates problems." "Funny," I said. "I was about to say the same thing to you." For a moment, we just stared at each other. Two stubborn people standing on opposite sides of a line she refused to admit existed. Then she smiled again. A slow, calculated smile. "Well," she said, "don't say I didn't warn you." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking like a countdown. I watched her go, feeling the weight of her words settle over me. This wasn't persistence. This wasn't annoyance. This was strategy. And the HOA had just made its next move. The binder started as a joke. I bought it on a trip into town, mostly because it was on sale, and partly because I thought it would be funny to keep all the HOA's nonsense in one place. A kind of scrapbook of absurdity. Something I could show friends someday and say, "Look what I survived." But by the time I slid the first plastic sleeve into place, the joke had worn off. This wasn't funny. This wasn't petty. This was a strategy, and I needed one of my own. I sat at the kitchen table that evening, the binder open in front of me, the stack of violation notices spread out like a deck of cards. The house was quiet except for the hum of the old refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling wood. My uncle used to say the house talked when it was thinking. That night, it sounded worried. I started organizing the notices by date, then by type, then by severity, or what passed for severity in HOA land. Unauthorized livestock, unapproved fencing, suspicious activity, community shoreline, each one more ridiculous than the last. But ridiculous didn't mean harmless. Ridiculous could still be weaponized. I added a section for photos, pictures of the goats, the fence, the lake, the mailbox, evidence, proof, a record of reality in case someone tried to rewrite it. Then I added a section for correspondence. Every letter, every note, every passive-aggressive flyer. Even the mandatory meeting notice went in, though I had to resist the urge to tear it in half first. By the time I finished, the binder was already half full, and the HOA had only just begun. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my eyes. I wasn't a paperwork guy. I wasn't a legal expert. I wasn't even particularly organized. But I knew how to prepare for a fight. My uncle taught me that much. "Never go into a battle blind," he used to say, "and never assume the other side is playing fair." I didn't need the reminder. The next morning, I put the binder on the passenger seat of my truck and drove to the county office. If the HOA wanted to bury me in paperwork, I was going to bury them in facts. The clerk behind the counter was a middle-aged man with glasses perched on the end of his nose and the weary expression of someone who has seen every kind of nonsense a rural county could produce. "What can I help you with?" he asked. "I need property records," I said. "Boundary maps, zoning classifications, anything you've got on my uncle's land." He raised an eyebrow. "HOA trouble?" I blinked. "How did you—" He waved a hand. "They've been trying to annex that lake for years. Your uncle kept them at bay, but, well, they're persistent." Persistent. That was one word for it. He printed out a stack of documents thick enough to choke a horse and slid them across the counter. "Everything you need should be in there. And if they give you any grief, you come back and talk to me." I thanked him and left, the weight of the papers heavy in my hands, heavier still in meaning. Back at the farm, I added the documents to the binder. The thing was starting to look less like a joke and more like a case file, a thick one. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and the lake turned gold, I sat on the porch, flipping through the binder. Page after page of proof that the HOA had no claim here, no authority, no right. But they weren't going to stop just because the law wasn't on their side. People like Marjorie didn't stop when they were wrong. They stopped when they were forced to. I closed the binder and set it on the table beside me. It felt solid, real, a foundation. For the first time since inheriting the farm, I felt something like confidence. If the HOA wanted a war, I was finally ready to fight one, and I had the binder to prove it. The lake had always been the heart of the property, a quiet place, a steady place. My uncle used to say it was the only thing on the farm that didn't ask for anything in return. It just existed. Peaceful, reliable. That peace didn't last long. The first real shot in the lake war came on a Saturday morning. I woke to the sound of laughter. Not the pleasant kind, but the loud, echoing kind that carries across water. When I stepped outside, I saw them, a group of subdivision residents setting up folding chairs on the shoreline like they were claiming beachfront property. A woman in a sun hat waved at me. "We're just here for the community picnic." I walked down to them, trying to keep my voice level. "This isn't community property." A man holding a cooler frowned. "The HOA said it was fine." Of course they did. I explained, politely at first, that the lake was private, that the land was private, that the HOA had no authority here. Most of them apologized and packed up, embarrassed. But a few lingered, muttering about new owners and ruining things. I didn't blame them. They'd been sold a lie long before I showed up. But the HOA wasn't done. 2 days later, I found a group of teenagers fishing off my dock. They weren't causing trouble, just enjoying the water. When I told them the lake wasn't public, they looked confused. "But the HOA said we could fish here any time," one of them said. I sighed. They're wrong. They left, but not before one of them snapped a picture of the lake, probably to show their parents, probably to complain, probably to feed the rumor mill that was already spinning out of control. The next morning, I found a fresh violation notice taped to my gate. Violation, for 12, obstruction of community recreation. I didn't even bother reading the rest. I just added it to the binder. But the real escalation came later that week. I was repairing a section of fence near the lake when I heard the unmistakable sound of a motorboat engine sputtering to life. My uncle never owned a motorboat. The lake wasn't big enough for one, so the sound made no sense, until I saw it. A small aluminum fishing boat, clearly borrowed from someone's garage, drifting across the water with 2 HOA board members inside. One of them was filming with a phone, the other was holding a clipboard. I walked to the shoreline. "Get off my lake." The man with the phone called back, "We're conducting a community inspection." "You're trespassing." "We're documenting misuse of shared resources." I felt my jaw tighten. "This isn't a shared resource." They ignored me, continuing to film the shoreline like they were building a case. I pulled out my own phone and started recording them right back. The man with the clipboard shouted, "You can't record us!" "You're on my property," I said. "I can record whatever I want." They exchanged a look, the kind of look people give when they realize the script they've been rehearsing doesn't apply anymore. After a moment, the man with the motor finally turned the boat around and sputtered back to the subdivision side. I stood there until they were gone, the water settling behind them. That evening, I found Marjorie waiting at the gate again. "You're creating unnecessary conflict," she said. "You're trespassing," I replied. She smiled, that thin, practiced smile that never reached her eyes. "The community has expectations. And I have property rights." Her smile faded. "You're being unreasonable." "No," I said. "I'm being lawful." For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. She just stared at me, her expression tightening into something cold and calculating. "This isn't over," she said. "I know," I replied. "That's why I'm documenting everything." Her eyes flicked to the binder under my arm. For a moment, I saw something in her expression, not fear exactly, but recognition. She understood what it meant. She understood I wasn't backing down. She turned and walked away without another word. I watched her go, the lake behind me reflecting the last light of the day. The war had started. The lines were drawn, and the lake, my lake, was the battlefield. But I wasn't fighting alone anymore. I had evidence. I had the law. And I had something the HOA didn't expect. I wasn't afraid of them. I should have known something was off the moment I saw the car. It wasn't the usual parade of SUVs and golf carts from the subdivision. This one was sleek, silver, and expensive enough to look out of place on my gravel driveway. It idled there like a predator waiting for the right moment to pounce. Marjorie stepped out of the passenger seat. That alone told me everything I needed to know. Marjorie didn't ride shotgun. She commanded. If she wasn't driving, it meant she wanted to make an entrance. She smoothed her blazer, plastered on her diplomatic smile, and approached me where I was stacking firewood. "Good afternoon," she said, voice syrupy sweet. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "You are," I said, "but go ahead." Her smile tightened, but she pushed on. "I wanted to talk about a mutually beneficial opportunity." I leaned against the woodpile. "That so?" She gestured toward the silver car. "A buyer, very serious, very eager. They're willing to make an offer on your property." I didn't respond. I just waited. People like Marjorie hate silence. It forces them to reveal their hand. She opened a leather folder and slid a sheet of paper toward me. "This is a generous offer, considering the condition of the property." I looked at the number. Then I looked at her. "This is a joke," I said. "It's a starting point," she replied, as if that made it less insulting. "It's half of what the land is worth." "Well," she said, clasping her hands, "value is subjective." "No," I said. "Value is math, and this is theft." Her smile vanished completely. "You're being unreasonable, and you're being transparent." She blinked. "Excuse me?" "You want the lake," I said. "You want the land. You want to fix the little problem of your HOA advertising amenities it doesn't own. And you think you can bully me into selling cheap." Her jaw tightened. "No one is bullying you." I laughed. "Marjorie, you've sent me 14 violation notices in 8 days. That's standard procedure. For properties in your HOA," I said. "Which this isn't." She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried a different angle. "Look, this doesn't have to be adversarial. The community has expectations. They've grown accustomed to the lake. It's part of our identity." "Then your identity is built on a lie." Her eyes flashed, a quick, sharp spark of anger she couldn't hide. "You don't understand how things work here," she said quietly. "I understand perfectly," I replied. "You're trying to push me out." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. If you sell now, you walk away with money in your pocket and no more stress. If you stay—" She let the sentence hang in the air like a threat. I didn't flinch. "If I stay, you lose." For a moment, we just stared at each other, two immovable objects locked in a silent standoff. Then she snapped the folder shut. "Think about the offer," she said. "It won't be on the table forever." "I'm not selling." She turned sharply and walked back to the car, her heels crunching against the gravel like punctuation marks. The silver sedan pulled away, leaving a cloud of dust and the faint smell of expensive perfume. I watched it disappear down the road. They weren't just trying to pressure me anymore. They were trying to buy me out, cheaply, quietly, before anyone realized the lake wasn't theirs. But they'd underestimated me. I wasn't overwhelmed. I wasn't intimidated. And I sure as hell wasn't selling. If anything, their offer made one thing crystal clear. The HOA was getting desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. By the time the county inspector arrived, I had a binder thick enough to use as a doorstop and a headache that felt like it had taken up permanent residence behind my eyes. I hadn't planned on calling the county. I'm not the type who runs to the authorities every time a neighbor gets pushy. But this wasn't pushy anymore. This was coordinated, calculated, and getting worse by the day. So I made the call. The inspector showed up on a Wednesday morning in a dusty county truck that looked like it had survived 3 decades of budget cuts. He stepped out, adjusted his hat, and introduced himself as Tom Hensley, a man with the weary posture of someone who had seen every flavor of rural nonsense imaginable. "You're the one with the HOA problem," he said, not even bothering to phrase it as a question. "That obvious?" He snorted. "They've been trying to annex this lake since before I started working here. And I've been here 22 years. That made me feel both better and worse. I handed him the binder. He flipped through it slowly, whistling under his breath. 14 violations in 8 days, he muttered. That's a record, and not the good kind. We walked the property together. I showed him the fence, the goats, the shoreline, the dock, the mailbox. Every place the HOA had claimed was somehow in violation of rules that didn't apply to me. Tom took photos, measurements, notes. He shook his head so many times I started to worry it might fall off. When we reached the lake, he crouched down and examined the shoreline like a detective at a crime scene. They've been holding events here, he said, without permission. He nodded. And advertising it as theirs. Yep. He stood, dusting off his hands. Well, that's going to be a problem for them. I couldn't help the small smile that crept onto my face. Music to my ears. We walked back toward the house, and Tom paused at the gate, looking out toward the subdivision. You know, he said, your uncle fought them off for years. They waited until he got sick to start pushing harder. That hit harder than I expected. He never told me, I said quietly. He was proud, Tom replied. Didn't want anyone thinking he couldn't handle it. I swallowed the lump in my throat. My uncle had been stubborn, tough, and fiercely protective of this land. The idea that the HOA had circled him like vultures when he was weakest made my blood boil. Tom closed the binder and handed it back to me. I'll file a formal report, a thorough one, and I'll be recommending the county send them a cease and desist. I blinked. That's fast. He shrugged. This isn't my first rodeo with them, and frankly, I'm tired of their nonsense. For the first time in weeks, I felt something like relief. Real, solid relief. As Tom climbed into his truck, he leaned out the window. One more thing. They're not going to like this. Expect pushback. I figured. He nodded. Good, because you're going to win this, as long as you don't tee back down. He drove off, leaving a trail of dust and the faint smell of old engine oil behind him. I stood there for a long moment, binder in hand, watching the subdivision across the road. It looked peaceful from a distance. Neat lawns, identical mailboxes, houses lined up like soldiers. But I knew better now. Behind those manicured hedges, the HOA was already planning its next move. And thanks to Tom's report, they were running out of legal ones. For the first time since inheriting the farm, I felt the balance shift. Just a little, but enough to notice. Enough to matter. The HOA had fired the first shots, but now I finally had ammunition of my own. I didn't go looking for Marjorie. I didn't have to. The morning after Tom filed his report, I found her standing at the edge of my driveway like she'd been waiting for me to step outside. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses on, posture stiff enough to snap. She didn't wave this time. She didn't smile. She just watched me walk toward her expression unreadable behind the dark lenses. Morning, I said, because someone had to be polite. I received a call from the county, she replied, her voice clipped. They claim you filed a complaint. I did. She inhaled sharply like she was preparing to dive underwater. That was unnecessary. No, I said. What's unnecessary is you pretending you own my lake. Her jaw tightened. The community has relied on that lake for years. And now the community needs to rely on reality. She took off her sunglasses then, slowly, deliberately, revealing eyes that were colder than I expected. You don't understand what you've done. Oh, I understand perfectly. I held up the binder. And so does the county. Her gaze flicked to the binder, the thick, overstuffed binder that had become my shield. I saw the moment she realized it wasn't just paperwork. It was evidence. It was leverage. It was a threat. I opened it to the inspector's report and handed her a copy. She didn't take it. Read it, I said. She didn't move, so I read it for her. The property in question is not, and has never been, part of the Lakeside Community HOA. All violation notices issued to the owner are invalid. Continued attempts to enforce HOA rules on this property may constitute harassment and misuse of authority. Her face didn't change, but something in her posture did. A tiny shift, a crack in the armor. I kept going. The lake is fully contained within the private property boundaries and is not a community amenity. Any representation of it as such is misleading and may violate county advertising regulations. That one hit her. Hard. Her lips parted just slightly, as if she'd forgotten how to breathe. I closed the binder. You've been selling houses by advertising access to a lake you don't own, and now the county knows. She finally found her voice. You're blowing this out of proportion. No, I said. You are. You've been harassing me since the day I arrived. You've sent fake violations, trespassed, lied to your residents, and now you're upset because someone finally told you no. Her eyes narrowed. You think this is over? I think you're out of moves. She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a hiss. You don't know what you're dealing with. Yes, I said. I do. A bully who finally got caught. For a moment, I thought she might actually explode. Her face flushed, her hands clenched, her breath came sharp and fast. But then, just as quickly, she smoothed her expression back into something neutral, controlled, calculated. She put her sunglasses back on. This isn't finished, she said. It is, I replied. You just don't like the ending. She turned and walked away, her heels striking the pavement like gunshots. But there was no confidence in her stride this time. No authority. No smugness. Just retreat. I watched her go, the morning sun casting her shadow long and thin across the road. For the first time since inheriting the farm, I felt the weight shift entirely onto my side. The HOA had pushed. I had pushed back. And now they were the ones stumbling. But as I stood there, binder in hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that Marjorie wasn't done. People like her didn't accept defeat. They regrouped. They recalculated. They retaliated. And something told me the next move wouldn't come in the form of a violation notice. It would be worse. Much worse. I didn't hear the explosion. Not a literal one, anyway. But the fallout reached me all the same. It started with a knock on my door early Saturday morning. Not the sharp, impatient knock of someone who thinks they own the place. This one was hesitant, embarrassed even. When I opened the door, a man in a Lakeside Community sweatshirt stood there, holding a folded HOA newsletter like it was a dead animal he didn't want to touch. Morning, he said. You're the guy with the lake? I resisted the urge to correct him. I own the property, yes. He nodded, shifting awkwardly. Right. So, is it true? The lake isn't part of the HOA? I blinked. You didn't know? He shook his head. None of us knew. We just got this. He held out the newsletter. I unfolded it. Special notice to all residents. Clarification regarding lake access. The letter was a masterpiece of damage control. Vague, defensive, and full of phrases like historical misunderstanding and informal community use. It didn't mention me by name, but it didn't have to. The message was clear. The HOA had been caught, and now they were scrambling. The man rubbed the back of his neck. We paid extra for lake access when we bought our house. It was in the brochure. The realtor said, I know, I said gently. I've met the realtor. He sighed. People are furious. There's a meeting tonight, a big one. I raised an eyebrow. HOA meeting? More like a mutiny, he said. You might want to stay clear of the subdivision for a bit. He left after that, trudging back toward the neat rows of houses that suddenly didn't look so peaceful anymore. I didn't have to wait long to hear what happened next. By noon, the shouting started. Even from my porch, I could hear it. Voices rising and falling, angry, overlapping, the kind of noise that only happens when a group of people realize they've been lied to and want someone to blame. I didn't go over there. I didn't need to. The subdivision practically broadcasted the drama across the road. At one point, I saw a crowd gathered on the HOA clubhouse lawn, people waving papers, people pointing fingers, people demanding answers. And in the middle of it all, Marjorie. She stood on the clubhouse steps, trying to maintain her usual composure. But even from a distance, I could see the cracks. Her gestures were sharper. Her smile was gone. Her voice, when it carried across the road, was strained. Miscommunication. Historical precedent. We acted in good faith. The crowd didn't buy it. Not anymore. By late afternoon, the shouting had turned into something quieter, not calmer, but colder. The kind of cold that comes when people stop yelling because they've made up their minds. Around sunset, a different knock sounded at my door. This one was firm, purposeful. When I opened it, a woman I'd never seen before stood there. Older, calm, holding a clipboard, but not in the way Marjorie did. This woman looked like she actually used hers for work, not intimidation. "Evening," she said. "I'm Linda. I'm the vice president of the HOA." I waited. She took a breath. "There's going to be a vote, tonight, to remove Marjorie as president." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She continued. "I wanted you to hear it from someone who isn't her." I nodded slowly. "I appreciate that." She hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, most of us didn't know what she was doing. We trusted her. Too much, apparently. I believed her. Mostly." She glanced toward the lake, its surface glowing orange in the fading light. "We'll stop the violations, all of them, and we'll correct the listings, and the brochures, and the website." "Good," I said. She met my eyes. "I'm sorry, truly." Then she left, walking back toward the subdivision with the tired posture of someone who had spent the entire day cleaning up someone else's mess. I stepped onto the porch and looked out at the lake. The water was still, quiet, peaceful again. The HOA hadn't collapsed completely, not yet, but the facade had cracked wide open. The lies were exposed. The residents were angry, and Marjorie's throne was wobbling. For the first time since this whole mess began, I felt something close to victory. Not triumph, not gloating, just relief. The truth had finally done what I couldn't do alone. It had turned the HOA against itself. The night the HOA voted, I didn't go anywhere near the subdivision. I didn't need to. The shouting from earlier had faded into a low, simmering murmur, the kind that meant decisions were being made behind closed doors. Real ones. Instead, I walked down to the lake. The sun was setting, turning the water into a sheet of molten gold. The air was still, warm, and heavy with the smell of pine and damp earth. For the first time since I'd inherited the place, the lake felt like mine again. Not a battleground, not a bargaining chip, not a stolen amenity. Just a lake. Just home. I sat on the edge of the dock, letting my feet dangle above the water. The boards creaked under me, familiar and comforting. My uncle had built this dock with his own hands, cursing the whole time according to family legend. But he'd loved it. And sitting there, I understood why. It wasn't the lake itself. It was the quiet, the space to breathe, the sense that the world couldn't reach you here unless you let it. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Linda, the HOA vice president, approaching slowly, hands in her pockets. "Thought I might find you here," she said. I nodded. "How'd the vote go?" She let out a long breath. 93% in favor of removal." I raised an eyebrow. "That's decisive." "People were angry," she said, "and embarrassed, and tired of being lied to." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She sat beside me on the dock, leaving a respectful distance. We're issuing a formal apology to the community, and to you. The board will be rewriting the bylaws. And the lake, she gestured toward the water. We'll make sure everyone knows it's yours. No more brochures, no more events, no more pretending. Good, I said quietly. She hesitated. Marjorie won't take this well. I figured. But she won't be bothering you anymore. She's lost her position and her influence. I nodded, watching a ripple spread across the lake's surface. Thank you. She stood after a moment. If you ever need anything reasonable, you know where to find me. I almost smiled. Reasonable is a good start. She laughed softly and walked back toward the subdivision, leaving me alone with the fading light. The sky shifted from gold to orange to deep purple. The first stars appeared. The lake reflected all of it, calm and steady, as if the last few weeks had never happened. I thought about my uncle, about the stubbornness I'd inherited, the land he'd fought for, the lake he'd dug with more determination than sense. I wondered what he'd think of all this. Probably that I'd taken too long to stand my ground. Probably that I should have chased Marjorie off with a rake on day one. But I'd gotten here eventually, and the lake was still mine. As the last light slipped behind the trees, I felt something settle inside me. Not triumph, not victory, but peace. The kind that comes from knowing you didn't let someone take what mattered. The kind that comes from choosing to stay when walking away would have been easier. The HOA had tried to push me out. They'd underestimated me. They'd underestimated the land. They'd underestimated the truth. I wasn't going anywhere. And neither was the lake. And that's my story. Thanks for listening, and if you liked it, I'd really appreciate you giving the video a like. And if you want more HOA stories like this, drop a comment below and let me know what kind of stories you'd like to hear. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll hopefully catch you next time.